welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and today, because I just decided to, we're going to do 3 for 3 days in a row. Welcome to part 3 of the Final Fantasy XIII Audiocast. We're going to talk about the third game in the series, and the one I think is honestly, at least from a gameplay perspective, is the best of the trilogy. I still think the first one's the best story-wise, but since they decided to make this a franchise, we have 3 of these games, and so I have to rate which one is the superior game. I would say this is the superior game, though from a story standpoint, I would say it's the weakest story. We'll get into that for a moment. Let's talk about the story, though. So, we have the first one here that starts out very good. It's a good book-ended, enclosed story. It's basically an upward Final Fantasy title in terms of a story. It's a very good story. It's not as good as the PS1 era stories, maybe better than 8, but it's a good story with good characters, basic on-rails gameplay, but the ending was definite. It felt definite. It felt like this was a closed story. You didn't really need to tell anything more. You got your happy ending. You did the thing, and you were done. But then they decided to alter the ending to this to justify the sequel. Because I guess Final Fantasy XIII performed really well money-wise, and they realized they could make even more if they made a sequel, just like they did Final Fantasy X-2. So that's what they did. They made the sequel, and this was also during the hype of the DLC era, so they gave this game some DLC. In terms of a story, it was far more open. In terms of a gameplay, it was far more open. So the story took a hit in terms of strength, but the gameplay took a boost in terms of, variety. It was still an on-rails auto battle, but you had a little bit more to do, if that makes sense. You could backtrack to any of the previous areas you've been to, which you couldn't do in the other one, mostly because time was not a factor. Time is a factor. It was the point of this game, time travel and all that crap. But it wasn't a factor so much that in this you were always on the run. Time was a factor because you were basically on a time limit, and you were always being chased. That's why you couldn't really backtrack so much until you got to pulse. And here, you could backtrack because you weren't essentially on a time limit because you could travel through time. So, for example, if you were ever late, you could just go back and fix it. So, it was not that much of a rushedness feeling to it. It felt like a decent, fun adventure. It was a bit more lighthearted than the other game was. And it was fine. It just wasn't as good as the first one in terms of story. But it was a little bit better in terms of gameplay. Now, at the end of this game's story, some sort of timey-wimey thing happens that basically traps everybody who's in this X timeline, who, the whole party joined up at this X timeline. Snow, Hope, Sarah, Noel, Saz, his son Dodge, everybody showed up here in this one timeline for the final battle or whatever, and now they're all stuck here. And suddenly time stops, nobody ages anymore, and that's where this comes in. There is some supplementary material that came with this series. I forget the name of the book, but there was a book. It details, I believe, Snow's exploits, because as we saw in this game, Snow was out and about doing stuff behind the scenes. We didn't see him. Like, he left about a year prior to this game setting begins. So, like, when you start the game with Sarah, Snow had already been out doing whatever he was doing for a whole year. So that book that came out, the supplementary material, explains part of what his adventure was all about, and where he ended up, and then how he ended up back here, so to speak. So at the end of Final Fantasy 13-2, some major spoiler plot MacGuffins happens. And a character is no longer around. I'm sorry, I cannot talk about this game without spoiling this. Sarah is dead. She became some sort of a Cirrus like Yule was, that I talked about in the previous video yesterday. She was some sort of Cirrus, just like Yule, for some random reason. I don't know, maybe Itcher decided, oh, let's give her the eyes. And basically, the same thing happened to her as what happens to all the other Yules. She sees a bunch of prophecies, and then she dies, because each vision that she sees shortens her lifespan. So she's dead. And everybody's distraught. Hope tries to keep things together. Saz tries to keep things together. Snow tries to keep things together, but he's broken inside. He couldn't save Sarah, he couldn't find Lightning, so all he could do is try to keep things together. That's here. And things are already falling apart, and he can't really do anything. So time is no longer a factor in this world after the events of Final Fantasy 13-2. What that means is nobody ages. Children are children forever. 500 years have passed since the ending of 13-2. And everybody's the same age here. This is basically like an apocalypse, the end of time. This emphasizes like, oh, it's the final 13 days, and it's really dumb. It's really dumb, but they try to explain it by, there's this hidden god, which was more of a god. It was just like, he was a bigger godly god than the Falsi, which were already viewed as gods in the first Final Fantasy 13. So there was a god above those gods, and then there was another one above time itself. So we call this god above god above god above gods, the godly god of gods. He is Bonivelza. So Bonivelza wakes up after Etro's gone, and he's like, okay, time to start things over. So he extracts Lightning from wherever the heck she was, and he does something to her. He takes Hope as well, and he extracts him from the dying time compressed whatever world, and they have him as your Bentley. So Hope is your Bentley. He's the guy behind the computer, always telling you X, and, oh, it's time to go over here, you gotta go do this now, etc. So that's who Hope is now. And, you are Lightning. You get to go around doing stuff, and for once, this is a single party member game. Technically, you have a second party member for just a short while, but for the most part, this is just a Lightning solo game. So story-wise, Lightning comes back at the end of time as a herald of the end of days. And the trailer kind of deceives you. Here's Snow right here, and Lightning's right here, and they're fighting. In the trailer, they're fighting, so you're thinking, oh, is Snow a bad guy here? And no, when you start the game, Snow is actually thinking you are the bad guy. So he's thinking you're the bad guy, so he's fighting you because he's actually trying to protect Yusnan, which is the city that he runs. There's only 2 cities left of this entire world. Like the world was like shrinking in like a sea of chaos. I don't know what that it gets conflict. This is why I didn't like that Final Fantasy 13 got a sequel. 13, the first one, was great. It was amazing. It was a great closed-ended story, but they just had to continue it. They just had to. They had to. So they made a sequel. They had a really good villain. I could get behind it. But they just kept going. They just kept going and going and going and going, and now we have the third one, and they went too far. They went too far. So, we have this dumb sea of chaos. It's swallowing up the world, and monsters are coming out of the chaos, or some dumb crap like that. But there's some interesting game mechanics to be had here. So let's talk about the game part, and then put the story on a back burner for the moment. The gameplay part is the strongest in the trilogy, even though the story is the weakest part of the trilogy. It's so weird how that happened. So you play as Lightning, and it's more of an action RPG now. It's no longer on Rails Auto Battle. You get to pick your crap and do it. And, so you get to pick about 4 abilities mapped to your face buttons, depending upon which console you played it on. I played it on the PlayStation 3, obviously, so you had X, triangle, circle, and square. So you mapped an ability to each one, and in combat, you would press 1 to perform that attack. For example, if you mapped Ruin to triangle, if you pressed that, Lightning would cast Ruin to the enemy. And they kind of combined a feature that was used in Final Fantasy X-2 with the garment grid. They called it a garment grid in X-2, where you could like change clothes, which would basically just change your job class from like a fighter to a thief or whatever. But like it would come with different abilities each time you changed your clothes. Well, I mean, they kind of did the same thing. There's stores where you could buy outfits. There's side quests you could do where you can earn outfits, and each outfit can learn abilities, and you can map abilities to these outfits and equip certain gears to these outfits. Each outfit has like stats. It's kind of like armor, but it's like suited to different things. Like one is nearly immune to magical damage, but is pretty weak to physical. Another is pretty immune to physical, but pretty weak to magical. They kind of balance things out. With each strength, there might be a weakness, or they might just be just a strength, but it doesn't have too many attacks. There's one that might just be dedicated to a unique attack. There's nothing else there. Like, there's this one outfit that has an attack called, like, the Artemis Bow or whatever, which is a very powerful attack that does critical damage, which is pretty useful. There's another one called, like, the Templar or something like that, which is very strong against magic attacks. You might actually need that for a future boss. The gameplay is very combat-oriented, but it's also very story-oriented, and it's also very time-oriented. If you've played a game called, on the Nintendo line of consoles called The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, you might be familiar with the type of concept being put into play here. What you have here are the final 13 days before the end of the world, and time. You're basically playing a game that is constantly timed. The time of day is constantly changing from X to X to X, and certain quests are available at certain times of the day, and you have X amount of days to do stuff until the end of the world. You start with about 6 days, and the more storyline quests you do, the more days you can unlock, until you get all 13 days unlocked, and at the end of the 13th day, the world ends, and you have to fight the final boss. If you win, I believe it just recycles time, and basically puts you into a New Game Plus. Yes, this is the first one, I believe, that actually has a New Game Plus, and it's actually built around the New Game Plus, because you see, you unlock certain features of this game in your New Game Plus in your second round. There's quests you cannot complete until you've beaten the game and started the second cycle of the 13 days. You can't max your level in the first playthrough because, for once, this is like one of the only games I know that does this. One of the only RPGs I've ever played that does this. Monsters are finite. They're randomly encountered, so they pop up and they're randomly encountered, but they're finite. For example, there might only be 30 behemoths left in the world. 30. And once you kill 30 behemoths, you will never encounter another behemoth in the world during that playthrough ever again. There's a side quest actually focused around this. There's a side quest called The Last One, where basically you kill 29 behemoths, and then the 30th one, the last behemoth, is this super strong variant of this monster that you get to kill, and you have to kill the last one of every single monster in the game. And you can basically eliminate and exterminate the monster population, save for one type of monster, which I guess the game coded it so that you would always have a random battle, because you might be able to kill every single other monster in the game except for this one, because there's like thousands coded into the game of this one type of monster. So if you wanted to get the last one of that monster, because there is one of those left, you have to unlock the 13th day. So you basically do all the side quests, do all the main story quests, and then you unlock the 13th day. So on the 13th day, a bonus dungeon pops up called the Last One Dungeon. So you go to this Last One Dungeon, and if you've killed all the last ones of all the other monsters, then on each floor there's nothing, so you could just keep going down. And eventually you'll come to the floor where this one monster that has thousands coded into the game, that last one variant of that monster is going to be in this dungeon, so you get to kill that one. And at the bottom of this dungeon is a super boss, this wyvern type super boss, which you have to use your garment grid outfits and accessories, and you have to really code your menus. Half this game is in the menus, alright? It's a JRPG, man. Half the game is in the menus. You gotta go into your menus, equip the right outfit, equip the right accessories, the right weapon, the right abilities for each one. You can equip up to 3 outfits at a time that you can swap between, because you have like an ATB bar, a time bar, so you do X amounts of attacks and whatnot, and your bar goes down, and it will slowly go up over time, but you don't want to just sit on this one outfit, so you swap to the next outfit, garment grid, and you get to do whatever attacks there, then you swap to the third one, and do whatever there, then you swap back to your first one. You just keep swapping between them to do your stuff, and they have abilities that they had for the paradigms, like Sentinel. So you have Steel Guard that you can have on one outfit to have that work as kind of like a Sentinel / Commando role. So you can have one ability for like Steel Guard, and then have one the other X button. You can have X be Steel Guard. You can have triangle be attack. So you can have like a multi-role outfit, so to speak, which I found really cool. So you have to fight and beat the wyvern using this super boss extremely exact strategy, which I did do. I ended up forgetting what that strategy was. I probably remember if I looked it up. Then after you do that Last One dungeon, there's another super boss on the 13th day called the Arrow Knight. You've probably encountered an Arrow Knight in previous Final Fantasy games. It's a common monster in some other games. Well, it's the super boss in this one. And it is probably the most challenging fight you'll ever have in this game, and I had a lot of fun fighting it. You had to use the Templar outfit, which you can use to basically turn yourself immune to magic attacks. And then you'll have to use this other outfit, which you can, with accessories and other stuff, you could eventually equip it and modify it so be immune to physical attacks. So you have 2 very tanky outfits that you will be swapping between while the Arrow Knight's attacking you. So, as the Arrow Knight's attacking you, you are now immune to magic damage, so he's not being able to hurt you with his magic damage, and you're able to attack him and do whatever. It's just a battle of attrition. You have to wait out its attacks and guard and all that other stuff and try to whittle his HP down until you eventually win. It's going to take a very long time, but you can do it. You'll be dead. And then you just wait out the 13th day until you beat the game. And then in the next New Game Plus, after your first playthrough, on your second playthrough, they have weapon customization. So you could, like, basically upgrade your gear and make it stronger, because I guess they expected you to beat the Air Knight and the Wyvern on a second playthrough. I did it on my first, but so you could do that on in the second playthrough. You can start doing that, get trophies, and get all that stuff, because this game is designed to be played multiple times. I believe all the cutscenes are skippable, because if you've seen them all the first time, you can just skip them and just keep going and save time. And the second time around. And as a game, I found this really cool. But then it starts to drain on you, because while that design, that aspect of the combat, all that stuff sounds really cool, the other half of this game is the missions. The main story missions are great, they're fine, I have no problems with that. But then there are these side quests that you could do, because that's how Lightning levels up. She doesn't gain experience in the game. She gains abilities through doing missions. Every time she does a side quest, she gains stat points to her allotted overall total. So the game is designed for you to do all the main quests, to do all as many side quests as you can, get all your stat boosts, and once they're all done, she can't level up anymore, so you go to a New Game Plus and you do them all again and build your character up even more and more and more if you want. I have nothing against this type of idea, but I kind of wish the side quests were a bit more entertaining. A lot of these side quests, the story is very bare bones. It's a side quest, of course it's going to be bare bones, but it's cheesy even for this type of game. It's cheesy even for this, because the tone of this game is like, this is the end of the world, right? This is the end of the world, and yet somebody is obsessed with next week's festival. So this guy's, like, so obsessed with making a festival, and he's got a plan for the festival, and and you need to help him get some stuff together for a festival. And then there's this other guy who's planning for a dinner party, and you gotta help him get stuff for the dinner party. And it's just like, dude, the world is ending. What you guys are... Now, they made a very arbitrary, dumb explanation of why the humans are like this. They basically say that Velza has cast like some sort of dumb spell on all the human populace, so that they wouldn't panic at the end of the world, so they wouldn't go crazy at the end of the world. So they're basically all taking the end of the world very, very well out of an arbitrary explanation, saying it's just because of a magic plot MacGuffin that nobody's freaking out, that these are the final 13 days. Literally, after these 13 days, everybody's dead. Everybody is dead after 13 days. So, it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird that you're on this big time clock, and yet nobody's rushing. Nobody's rushing. Everybody's kind of taking it. And then we can go into the main plot, and we can talk about that. There is 2 towns. You have Luxurion, which is the biggest town, and then you have Yusnan, which is basically like the Vegas of your Fabula Nova Chrysalis game world. There's 4 main areas here. You have Luxurion, you have Yusnan, you have the Dead Dunes, and then you have this like forested area. So you got 2 big nature sprawling areas, and then you got 2 towns. That's it. That's all you get. Sorry to disappoint you. So in Luxurion, it's kind of like a religious thing. There's this religious cult that comes up, and they're worshipping the end of the world, and they're preparing for the end of the world, and for some reason, Vanille and Fang are back. Oh, let's talk about that. I forgot to talk about that. Vanille and Fang, at the end of this game, they turned to Crystal, trying to basically save the world. They completed their focus, so to speak, and they turned to Crystal, holding up Cocoon and saving everybody. They've been Crystal all throughout this game. So, they haven't really been a focus for a while. And suddenly, at the end of the world, they were freed from the crystal slumber. So you get to see Fang and Vanille again, which I thought was fine. Fang is cool as hell still, as she was in the first installation. She is now this bandit king leader of the Dead Dunes, doing her thing. She's always cool. And then Vanille is like this religious cult icon or whatever, because now she gets to do her serious crap or whatever. She's like this whole chosen one for the whole sacrifice or whatever. I have no idea what this religion is about. I didn't care about it when I played the game, and I don't care about it now. So, those are the 4 areas in the game world. It's not you don't have the time to stop and look at the roses. I kind of wanted to in the Dead Dunes, to be honest, because in the Dead Dunes, the music is incredible. Let's talk about the music for Lightning Returns. If there's one thing I could say was consistently good all throughout this trilogy, it's the music. The music in the first Final Fantasy XIII was very nice. I could listen to the music for hours in every area, pretty much. There was a track playing that I wouldn't mind just leaving on my TV, on pressing pause or triangle while I go do other things on the computer or something. I would listen to whatever was on there. And there was good background music. And in 13.2, it was the same thing. There was a lot of good themes, good battle themes, and they kept the same thing for this. There's really good themes, especially in the Dead Dunes. The nighttime Dead Dune themes. There's music that changes between day and night, right? There's a different theme during the day. There's a different theme during the afternoon. There's a different theme during the night. It's really awesome, really. Really awesome. But the problem with this game is that they designed the game world that you could explore all the areas that you need to in your playthrough within 13 days, but you are on a time crunch. You are always on a time limit. There's ways you could pause the time from progressing by battling and doing stuff like that. You could build up time gauges and stuff like that. And you could do some side quests to pause time, and that's part of how you can do everything in a single playthrough, is by abusing that. But it's still ultimately a time crunch. The game is ultimately going to end at some point, because time is ticking, always ticking. The days are going by out of your control. It's a plot progression mechanic. Honestly, I would have preferred a plot progression mechanic of every main quest you do, then a day passes. I would have preferred that, so I had time to explore the world and actually take in the environment, because this is a beautiful game. This is beautiful. The graphics here are probably even better than the previous 2 installments. 13.2 reused a lot of assets from 13.1. The graphics were still good. They didn't need to oomph it. It was good. It's good today, even. If you played these games on a good resolution screen, it would look like popping. It would really look good. It wouldn't look good like a late 2010s AAA title that had hundreds of billions of dollars put into the budget. It's not going to look as good as that. Obviously, this Final Fantasy 13 is 13 years old now. Wow. I guess it was fate that I talked about these 3 games now, since they're since the first one is 13 years old. That's crazy. That's crazy, man. That's crazy, the coincidence. So, I would have preferred that, but the time limit is what it is. It is what it is. Because technically, when the time runs out, you just beat the boss once you're of a high enough level. Once you do... They designed the final boss to be beatable if you did most of the side quests and all the main quests. If you made it to the 13th day, the stats Lightning had accumulated from doing all those the quest piece. The rewards was, stats. You don't get experience for beating monsters. So the stats she had accumulated after doing all the main quests and most of the side quests would be enough. They decided to be enough to beat Bunavelza at the end of your first playthrough. They designed it to be like that. But since I went above and beyond the Call of Duty, I beat the Air Knight and the Wyvern and all of that, and I did all of the side quests except for the ones that you couldn't do in a single playthrough, the ones you had to do on a second playthrough. Since I did all of those, Lightning's numbers were way up there, and Bunavelza was a chump. I was able to beat him like he was garbage, man. He was piss. He was poopy. So, because it's like, where's my train of thought? It's going away. Alright, so the time it can run out, you beat Bunavelza, and then it just resets. You just go back out there to the world, because it's open. The world is open. Nothing is barred off from you, basically. You can go out into the world and do anything at the start of the first day. If you wanted to do Snow's story in Euston on day 1, you could do Snow story in Euston on day 1. If you wanted to do Noel's story in Luxurion on day 1, you could go do that. If you wanted to do Saz's on day 1, you could go do that. Nothing was, like, linear. This was the most open of the trilogy. So, even though, like, the game restarts and all that stuff, you're still out there in the world. You can still go anywhere you want. And the monsters respawn, obviously, so you can start killing them again if you got sick and tired of killing the one monster that they programmed thousands into the game with, even though the others are, like, under 100 each. So, if you want the variety again, you go back to the New Game Plus, and you get to kill them all again. But, there's not too much else to say if I wanted to just talk about the gameplay. It is the best in the trilogy, honestly. And in terms of DLC, this game does have DLC. I did get 2 DLCs. They're basically outfits. There's no story DLC, alright? So they learned their lesson from 13.2, and they realized, okay, we need to make sure that you get a complete story with this game. So we're going to give you the complete story with this. We're still going to have DLC, but they're going to be cosmetic outfits. Some of them might have some useful, unique skills. For example, there is a Cloud Strife Soldier outfit that you can get for Lightning. And you get to use the Crossblade Limit Break that Cloud would use in Final Fantasy VII. And you can use that as a unique ability when you have that outfit equipped. And you can even use the Buster Sword and all that other stuff. But they're bare bones level stuff. Like they're like early game outfits. They're early game outfits. And after you beat by day 3, the DLC outfits are garbage. So it's not pay to win. They're just pay to use if you want to. Because there are, like, 90% of the outfits that you can get in the game are better than the DLC ones. So I like that. Nothing DLC was needed to play the game and get the full experience. You could just get it if you wanted it. I wanted the Cloud Stripe outfit, obviously, so I got that one. Because, Buster Sword and shit like that was really cool. Her outfit was really cool. But it will only work for a little while. After a couple hours, the other outfits far, far surpassed. But I believe that you can upgrade the Buster Sword in New Game Plus to make it useful. So I guess there is that. I'm gonna have to pause this for one moment. I do apologize for that, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't realize my alarm was still programmed to go off. I'm done anyways, pretty much. So the only thing I have left to talk about is the story. So let's talk about that. As soon as the game starts, I made a mention of this. As soon as the game starts, you have about 5 or 6 main quests that show up in your your data log or whatever, and you could do them in any order you want. In any order you want. There is nothing that's locked off to you. You don't have to do anything first. In fact, it's actually encouraged to, like, change it up with each playthrough. Because, for example, the Snowvilliers storyline, you get to fight him as a boss, right? So, depending upon when you do his main mission and fight his storyline's final boss, depending upon when you do it, the difficulty and the version of Snow that you fight will change. For example, if you fight Snow between days 1 and 4, he will be at the weakest. So, you can beat him, and he'll be normal-looking Snow. But if you fight him anywhere between, like, day 5 to, like, day 8 or something, he'll be in, like, a second stage boss mode, and you can fight him an even stronger version of him. So you can take him out. And then if you decided to fight him anywhere between, like, days 9 and 13, day 9 and 12, more like, he'll be in, like, the 3rd Uber tier stage, and he'll be even tougher to fight. And, they have that idea with the others a little bit. It's not as powerful as Snow. They designed, Snow was the poster boy of the trailers. I guess they did the most with him. The others were just there. But there was some ways you could jazz it up. If you didn't want to do Snow first in the second playthrough, you could do Noel first, or Saz, or Caius. Caius comes back. Yeah, because he's not dead. Because, well, he is, but he's not. It's funny. When you meet Caius again, Lightning's surprised and says, "Aren't you dead?" And Caius says, "She won't let me die." And you get to see all the clones of Yule. Basically, every single Yule that died throughout time. Now that time is gone, all of the Yules are back. They're all here at the same time, basically. They're ghosts of Yule and all that stuff. And it was a really interesting storyline segment. I will say that one was probably my favorite. Caius and Snow's storylines are probably my favorite ones. Noel's was okay. Saz's was probably the weakest. It felt arbitrary. I guess it felt like Saz was the afterthought. They just added him in because people liked Saz and they wanted to see him. So I guess they added him there. He was just an afterthought. And Fang's the most lighthearted of the trio until you get to, like, the Vanille part and she joins up with you and you have to do the Vanille part. And that's kind of heart-wrenching, but so the order is whatever order you want them to be. The order I did it in is, for my first playthrough, I did Snow first. Because, Snow was the poster boy. He was the first guy you did on the first day. And so I wanted to do him first. Then I did Noel. Then I did Saz. Then I did Caius. No, then I did Fang. Then I did Caius. Caius is the last one I did. And once I took him out, then all that was left to do was all the side quests. And once all the side quests are out of the way, you unlock the 13th day. And then I did the super bosses on the 13th day. Then you fight the final boss. And then you get New Game Plus. And then you can do it all over again. In any order you want. It's completely open to you to do whatever the heck you want. The game is yours. So for people who really like freedom and like an open world to do whatever the heck you want, this is the definitive one for the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy to do this in. It's just very convoluted. I wouldn't even say it's convoluted, it's just dumb with the story sometimes. Like the Sea of Chaos swallowing the land. How is that? I guess because, like, in 13.2 there was the Seas of Chaos in, like, Etro's dimension, right? So I guess by killing Etro and Caius and stabbing the Heart of Chaos or whatever, you merged Etro's dimension with the timeline for where Snow and everybody else was hanging out in the main world. So maybe you merged it. So, like, the Seas of Chaos in Etro's dimension, which was being held there, was now free to swallow up time itself, I guess. I don't know. That's just my theory. Either way, as a game, this one is the best in the trilogy. Okay? As a game, this is the best. This one right here. So it's kind of like with the Sly Cooper in regards to how I would rank them. I would say that the first one is the strongest in terms of story, but it's very weak in terms of gameplay. It was very linear. In terms of the second one, it was very balanced between story and gameplay. It was very balanced. It wasn't as on rails. It was open enough to be free to do whatever you wanted, but the story took a hit because of it. And then, in this one here, the story took the biggest hit, but the gameplay took the biggest boost. So you had the most open gameplay experience here, while you had a limited story experience. So if you said this game was all story, very little gameplay, you'd be right, and this game was all gameplay and very little story. These two are like night and day, and this is like the balanced variation between the two, right? That's the best way I could explain it. And I would say that this whole trilogy is worth at least a single playthrough all the way through. But if you're going to play this one, you need to get the Lightning Returns DLC. You need to get that one. I would just recommend getting all of them, because they're all worth it, honestly. But if you're on a crunch, just get the Lightning DLC. These two, you don't have to get any DLC for. These two right here, just get the games, and that's it. And if you don't even want the Lightning DLC, just watch the cutscenes on YouTube or something. I guess that concludes my Final Fantasy XIII Audiocast. Part 3 is done. That was Lightning Returns. I honestly like this trilogy. And if I were to go back, I would probably replay Final Fantasy XIII. And not touch the sequels. The sequels are worth touching at least once, in my opinion. They're worth touching at least once. And for a gameplay standpoint, I would love to play Lightning Returns again. I would love to play it as a gameplay standpoint. But for the story, I wouldn't come back to that for that. I would come back to the first one for the story, definitely. But I wouldn't come back to Lightning Returns for the story. I would recommend it definitely for the gameplay, though. It's definitely worth a playthrough for that. It was definitely for that. And it's definitely worth it for the story, just to get the whole experience, you know? But that's it. That's Final Fantasy XIII. This has been an audiocast. This is not a review. I want to make that clear. I'm not rating these games. This is all my opinion. I'm not... anything I say that's bad is just, like, bad to me. What's bad to me might be awesome to you, and that's fine. It's awesome to you. That means it's awesome to you. It's awesome. It just doesn't make it awesome to me, you know? One man's trash is another man's treasure. One man's treasure is another man's trash. You know? Anyways, I've ranted long enough. Signing off. And remember, be imaginative.